I used to think a child psychologist was a little kid. Haven't I told you that before? I feel like I've revealed that before.
Wait, when did you think this?
Growing up.
That's hilarious.
It's child psychologist. Like a child actor isn't an actor who plays children. It's a child.
I'm confused.
Are there any actors?
To be fair, I tuned out of this conversation for a second.
Welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast, Pennsylvania 18 Results Edition. I'm Galen Druk. Jody is out today. The race has not been officially called yet, but here's what we know. Democrat Conor Lamb is leading Republican Rick Saccone by 641 votes, with 100% of precincts reporting. There are a couple hundred absentee ballots left to count, but nonetheless, Lamb and national Democrats have claimed victory. So we're here to discuss. Editor-in-Chief Nate Silver, how's it going?
It's going well.
Late night last night? Did you stay up?
Not really. Once the upshot took the needle down, I'm like, I'm out. I'll just wait for the morning.
Senior politics writer Claire Malone.
Hi, Galen.
Hey, Claire. And we have politics editor Micah Cohen.
Hello.
Look, people who care about a win one way or the other can feel however they want about who's slightly up or down, but the vote margin right now is about 1/4 of a percentage point, so I think for our purposes, we can basically call that a tie, and also a 20-point shift in favor of Democrats in this district.
Our art director, Kate LaRue, when leaving the office yesterday, she had pre-baked art for our post-election analysis. And kind of offhand, she was like, yeah, I have one if the Republican wins, one if the Democrat wins. Get your shit out of luck if they tie. And we both kind of laughed.
Well, there you go.
Just fuse them together.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so, Nate, what's your headline?
My headline is that any Republican who thinks this is anything other than a catastrophic data point is an idiot. However, it's just one data point. But it's like, there are not any good excuses.
That's a terrible headline.
Well, yeah, I think that would be rejected by our headline editors.
Let's workshop that.
Yeah. Okay, so the headline would be, Republicans have no excuses for what happened in Pennsylvania 18 last night.
That's a good headline.
Yeah.
Kind of ranking that, should they be more or less worried than they were before last night?
It's the same. Everyone's kind of acting... Okay, I get that this was the first kind of like, oh, this is a House seat that we've flipped for the Democrats.
I mean, there was no Roy Moore excuse, right?
Right. But it sort of seemed to me like not a huge revelation, because this is something, and maybe some of this is like the 538 bubble, if I'm pulling back and being self-aware, but this sort of feels like something we've been talking about for a long time, which is the gradual creep of like Democratic enthusiasm and Republicans not being as excited. And you've now seen a series of races where you've kind of had these shifting sentiments from Republican to Democrat in these districts.
I think that's right. Let me try to make an argument for more panic, though. We have a bunch of different...
panic from whom?
The Republicans should be more panicked this morning.
Even more? Okay.
Even more. I think you're right, but let me just play devil's advocate. We have several different good indicators going into the 2018 midterms, right? We have special elections, we have the generic ballot, we have Trump approval, we have congressional retirements, and some are worse for the GOP than others, right? Among federal House elections, we have only had a handful. How many? It's like 8 or 9, depending on if you count runoffs and primaries separately. But I think the federal special election results are among the worst indicators of all those for Republicans. And with Pennsylvania 18 now, I think maybe we can be more confident in putting more weight on that relative to the generic ballot, where Democrats are up 8, which is a lead, but which still suggests kind of a close House race. Special elections are real bad for Republicans.
I mean, let's get into the weeds here a little bit. 8 points is a big lead for Democrats on the generic ballot, or 8 or 9, whatever it is. The problem is that they have to win by about 7, we think, given the way districts are constructed, because of districting and gerrymandering and incumbency. So, therefore, if they only, quote unquote, win the House popular vote by 8 or 9 points, they probably win the House, but it's actually pretty close where you're sweating individual results. In special elections so far, they have outperformed their benchmark by 16 or 17 points.
Yeah.
I don't even want to think about how many seats Republicans would lose, but you're talking about some crazy number, probably 70 or 80 or 90 seats. I mean, if this pattern were to manifest itself, the one we've seen now and actually quite a few special elections onto the actual map in November. It's just unprecedented since before World War II type of wave. And again, both special elections and the generic ballot and things like Trump approval and the kind of history are pretty reliable indicators. So the whole basket of indicators indicates that Democrats are probably still only like a modest favorite to take the House. I go back and forth between like kind of modest and a little bit more than modest. But this tail risk for Republicans where they just get decimated and lose 80 seats is on the table.
So that's why I think they should be a little bit more worried. Is it feels like that tail risk the chance of it has gone up a little bit.
But if you look at, for example, 2006 special elections, you'll see that on average they outperformed their benchmarks by like 15 points, but then in the actual midterms only outperformed by like 8 points or something like that. So where is that disconnect? Do we think that could happen again?
The disconnect, Galen, is that you're kind of cherry-picking one data point there. In general, special elections are pretty reliable, and so is a generic ballot and other indicators. One difference, and why this result's especially scary for Republicans, is that generic ballot polls right now are conducted among registered voters, sometimes adults, not very many likely voters, and it's kind of silly to apply like a likely voter model now in March for a November election. It's certainly possible that like when you actually account for the Democratic enthusiasm advantage, what goes from like a 8 or 9 point lead on the generic ballot winds up being a 13-point lead or something, right? I mean, it's possible to have a big enthusiasm gap favoring the out party. In 2010, Republicans were the out party, meaning not the president's party, and they had like a 6-point enthusiasm gap on top of their advantage in registered voter polls. And so, you know, we had a high turnout in this race. You had high turnout in Alabama, even though some people sat out because of Roy Moore, still had midterm type turnout in those last two races. Democrats did really well on both of those, and so they're showing that you can have these really, really major shifts under midterm-like conditions. That ought to really, really scare Republicans.
So if you look at the average swing in special elections in the run-up to midterms and then the national House margin, that 2006 result is actually a bit of an outlier. Usually they're closer. So it was 7 points off in 2006. 2014, it was just 2 points off. 2010, 1 point off. 2002, 5 points. 98, 2 points. 94, 2 points.
So do you think at this point that any Republican in an R+20 district or less should be concerned?
I mean, no, I don't really think so. It's like those places are probably pretty... There's not going to be a lot of fruitful competition. That Democrats will want to invest in areas like that overall. Now, are there districts where people are going to like cherry pick? Sure, maybe. And you know, there happens to be like a really interesting Democratic candidate who could fit in that district and win it. You've got, you know, some people down in West Virginia, for instance, where that could maybe happen. But I think overall, you feel pretty safe as a Republican if you're in that heavily of a Republican district.
I think that's right. I mean, I think one thing coming out of the Tuesday night result that people are saying is like, well, this was a +20 Republican district, and there are 118 House seats that are +20 or more Democratic leaning, right? That does not mean that Democrats are going to win 118 House seats. It does mean that maybe the kind of field of play extends close to that far. But Claire's right that a lot of Republicans at the Republican end of that spectrum won't get a challenger or will get a well-funded challenger. But this result at least suggests you should at least like kind of look over your shoulder a bit.
More than that, you know, Saccone is not a great candidate, okay, but well within the range of typical candidates. And Conor Lamb is a good candidate, but he's not necessarily the second coming of Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama or something. You know, this is well within the range of a normal outcome, and turnout was normal. So look, any Republican in district that's like,
can I point out
20 points or less needs to be not just on their toes, but like has to be running a real campaign.
I agree with like running a real campaign, but I also think that the kind of strength that Lamb had in backing by unions and the kind of voters who maybe had voted for Trump or voted for Republicans often, but were also very sympathetic to unions, like that's also particular to that area of the country. Like I do think that there was something about the district that made it particularly right for a Democrat like Lamb. So sure, like Republicans should be taking this seriously. Like they shouldn't just think it's going to be a walk-off home run for them. But I also don't think it's like I don't know.
I actually have a quote here from the boss of the United Mine Workers in Greene County. He said, Conor Lamb is, quote, a God-fearing, union-supporting, gun-owning, job-protecting, pension-defending, Social Security-believing, sending drug dealers to jail Democrat. He's also ex-military, personally opposed to abortion, doesn't support Nancy Pelosi. I mean, how much of that, it doesn't seem like you're saying that matters all that much. But how much of that does matter? Could Nancy Pelosi run in this district and win?
That's a stupid question, Galen.
I mean, but look, if we're saying that any Democrat can do well under these circumstances, so where's the threshold? I mean, how much does Conor Lamb matter?
Well, okay, let's put some benchmarks on it. The average Democratic overperformance in these special elections, I don't know if we should count Georgia once or twice, but 16 or 17 points, right? So like 21 or 22 points per our math last night. Maybe 6 or 7 points of this has to do with the candidates, the combination of Lamb being good and Saccone being bad.
That seems about right. That seems reasonable.
But the point is, if the average overperformance is 16 or 17 points, it's a freaking tsunami for Republicans. And so it's like, so we're losing the forest for the trees here a little bit.
So that the 6 or 7 points does seem like a reasonable sort of ascribe it to the particulars.
Give Lamb for 5 and subtract 2 for Saccone.
But so how do we make sense then of the, let's say it's plus 16, plus 17 Democrats in special election, and then just plus 8, just quote unquote plus 8 on the generic ballot? Why are those so different?
Well, one reason might be that the special elections feature actual voters and the generic ballot features registered voters adults, who may or may not vote. And remember, turnout is not that high. And I mean, these special elections turnout has been 2/3 as high in Alabama and Pennsylvania as a presidential year, which is about what you get in a midterm usually. Midterm turnout is not that high, which means that you can have a lopsided enthusiasm gap favoring one party or another. And so, I don't think Democrats are going to win the House by 16 points, right? But it could easily be that generic ballot, when voters become more engaged and pollsters switch over to likely voter models, it could easily get in the territory of 12 or 13. And 12 or 13 is maybe a 50-seat gain for Democrats. I'm not saying it's like the modal outcome, but I'm saying it's a asymmetric distribution, and that once you start to get beyond 10, 12 points, a lot of the gerrymanders that were meant to protect Republicans collapse. If you get really far out, they can even begin to backfire. And so that right tail ought to be really scary.
Okay, we're going to continue our conversation about Pennsylvania's 18th, but first, today's podcast is sponsored by Blue Bottle Coffee. Nothing compliments your morning quite like a cup of coffee, especially after you've spent your night watching elections returns roll in. But we're not talking about just any coffee. We're talking about delicious, flavorful coffee that will change the way that you look at coffee. Blue Bottle Coffee provides the most delicious coffee in the world right to your door. Your Blue Bottle coffee is roasted and shipped to your home within 48 hours of placing your order, so the beans arrive at peak freshness. One sip of Blue Bottle coffee will make you realize that you've been drinking subpar coffee your entire life. So what's the difference between subpar coffee and Blue Bottle coffee? For starters, Blue Bottle has an insane dedication to coffee. They search the planet far and wide to secure exclusive relationships with independent growers all over the world to source only the most delicious and sustainable coffee there is. And nobody takes freshness as seriously as Blue Bottle. If you're worried about the flavor, don't be. Take Blue Bottle's Coffee Match Quiz to find the perfect coffee just for you. From blends to espresso to single origins, Blue Bottle Coffee has it all. Hurry to bluebottlecoffee.com/politics for $10 off your first coffee subscription order. That's bluebottlecoffee.com/politics. Again, bluebottlecoffee.com/politics. Okay, let's continue where we left off. So the way that this race has been framed is that it's a test of the political waters in Trump country. Whether or not that's the proper characterization, you can debate. So after last night, do we think it was a test of the political waters in Trump country? And if so, what's the result?
Man, you know what I've started to feel like about politics and politics writing? I was thinking this morning as I was reading through everyone's stuff. It's like we're all just sports reporters, and it's like the longest baseball season ever. And we're all just writing the same goddamn game story over and over, and it's and we're using the same phrases. You know how like sports reporting has a limited vocabulary, so everyone's like, I'm not even trying to be shady to Galen about like the Trump country thing, but like over and over, I'm just like, man, yeah, it's like a certain...
I mean, I think on Monday we talked about, yeah, you can kind of say part of this is the Trump country that the media has described, but another part of it is squarely in the kind of more Romney-Clinton territory, right? Allegheny County.
Right. Certainly this is an area of the country that went hard for Trump, but I also think it maintains a certain character of suburbia, and within suburbia, even if it's Trump country suburbia, it has voters who are perhaps skeptical of the direction of Trump's Republican Party, and that makes them shift around a little bit more.
So Allegheny, which roughly speaking is like the more suburban, better educated, higher income county in this district, is really where Lamb won this. He outperformed Obama by 23 points there. Lamb outperformed Obama and Clinton everywhere, but he outperformed them more in the more suburban parts of the district. So the kind of conclusion is Democrats can make inroads in Trump country, but that within reason. Yeah, right. That's it. But that Trump country isn't abandoning Trump wholesale, for one, and two, Democrats can make more inroads in the more suburban parts.
It makes sense with it. It goes back to our thing, which Harry and I wrote like a year and a half ago, which is this kind of goes with the general trends of the party, which is these suburban white voters are generally more educated, which frankly falls in line with sort of the direction of who is voting as a Democrat. People with more education in the United States are more and more voting as Democrats. And if I am not citing the census stats right now about the other counties in PA 18, but I would bet that they have a lower education level than Allegheny County. And therefore, according to broad trends about the Republican Party, they're going to be more likely to vote Republican. And so in some ways, it's like a little encapsulation of Pennsylvania 18 is like a little encapsulation of the directions that people are going education-wise. I mean, we saw huge splits with that in 2016.
So for national Democrats who are looking at this race when they're thinking about how to make their pitch in 2018, do you think this encourages them to make a harder pitch for the suburban, wealthier voters who maybe voted for Clinton for the first time in a while for a Democrat in 2016, or to try to reinvigorate the white working class that some of whom voted for Obama and then went hard for Trump in 2016?
I mean, I think in 2018 you want to go after those suburban voters, not to broaden it out to a presidential election. You know, what's the line with Democrats? They say we want to have an economic message that works for everyone, all working class people, not just white people, because a lot of the working class in America is minority. But I think that a lot of that centers on, if you're going to win back those Obama-Trump voters, that you need to be delineating more clearly what the Republicans are doing wrong and what you're doing right. And I'm not sure we have that yet, in part because Democrats are still kind of getting their... What did that New Zealand... did you see that New Zealand diplomat who said, Democrats need to get their together or else we're all... I mean... She literally tweeted that. Anyway, but my general point is, I think the Democrats are sort of, in the short term, to win the midterms, they need to make inroads with voters that are already... Republican voters that are already kind of leaning more their way during the era of Trump, i.e. the suburbanites. But in order to win a broad map of the country, sure, you want to make plays for...
Yeah, especially, I mean, if you're talking about the presidential election, then the Electoral College kind of...
It necessitates that.
No, but let's talk about the midterms. I mean, is there a case to be made that, hey, Democrats, just go all in on the suburbs that are already trending your way and worry about the white working class areas, but not as much as you worry about the suburbs?
I go back and forth on this, to be honest with you. I tend to agree. Nate makes this point that, like, just bash the hell out of Trump and worry about the details later, at least for 2018. But... that doesn't preclude, for the midterms, you'll see what we saw here, which was you'll have candidates pop up that fit their district, right?
Yeah, but I think the Democrats are doing more to curate that than you're giving them credit for. We've talked about this off podcast, but I thought the...
Verbal slack.
But I thought that the DCCC sort of spiking Laura Moser down in that Houston adjacent race, which is like I think it was +7 Republican district, and it's a Democratic primary with too many candidates, and they were kind of, I think they probably had internal polling, as I'm sure Emily's List did, because Emily's List didn't endorse Laura Moser, they endorsed another woman, but they're basically like, okay, we want to choose a Democrat who's right for this district. And I think in their whatever their internal showed, it was, listen, this Laura Moser is too liberal for this district. We want to make a play for this district. We think we have a good shot at it. And that's a suburban Republican district in Texas where Democrats are, paying attention, trying to be in play. I do think there's some concerted effort to winning those people.
No, as there should be.
Yeah.
It's what we said before. If all right, this is really rough, but if there's a 22-point shift towards the Dems in this district, if 15, 16, 17 of those points are the national environment, right, and 4, 5, 6, 7 of those points are candidate campaign specific, well, then Lamb needed those points to win, right? So, I think if the DCCC is putting their thumb on the scales to get candidates they think fit these districts, that's exactly what they should be doing.
So do Democrats not really need to make this choice then between the Obama-Trump voter and the Romney-Clinton voter? You can kind of fit the message for whatever district you're running in, and overall your overarching message is just anti-Trump.
I mean, of course you want candidates that fit the district better.
They don't have to make the decision nationally. Right?
And local,
until 2020.
I mean, I think Democrats have gone there's clearly a lot of energy in the Democratic Party on the left. I think that it's pretty likely that you'll have the left will kind of decide who the Democratic nominee is in 2020. I think there's been a little bit of an overcorrection in the conventional wisdom as the left has also come to dominate online discourse among Democrats. I think there's been a little bit of an overcorrection. People went from we need to only nominate candidates like Conor Lamb to that it isn't helpful to have a centrist. It probably is actually helpful to have a centrist, and you see high turnout here if the centrist is a good fit for his or her district. But look, the earlier point you're making about should Democrats target the suburbs? I mean, no, they should target everywhere. There's actually no evidence that Democrats are performing especially well in the suburbs relative to other parts of the country. And this district, where it's kind of a hodgepodge of different stuff, it was one of their best performances, maybe especially in Allegheny County, but really the whole district swung quite a bit. So the whole suburbs talking point is surprisingly evidence-free. It's just kind of an assertion people make, and it doesn't really actually fit the data all that well. I think it came about in part because of that November election in Virginia and New Jersey, where Democrats did well. But those actually weren't the most impressive elections for Democrats. The special elections are more impressive.
I think it more comes from
2016.
Right, Trump. Just that among conservatives and Republicans, you see the most resistance to Trump among...
Orange County, first time it voted for a Democrat since FDR 2016.
I think that's where it comes from, which isn't to say it's right, but I think that's where it comes from.
But,
it makes a fair amount of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes sense if you don't actually pay attention to how midterms work. Because midterms are all about reversion.
Makes sense to me, then. No.
Midterms are all about reversion. I'm in a snarky mood today.
You really are.
Jeez, I'll get it.
Lots of work. I had 11 meetings yesterday. You know how that makes me feel.
Yeah, I do. I was in all of them.
You all the fucking weeks.
Does somebody have a tissue for Nate?
Oh, Mom and Dad are fighting.
Yeah, Galen, you can't cut. Galen cut the big fight out of the last one. Keep this one in.
All right. Okay.
No, but the point is, a lot of special elections is reversion to the mean, right? It's that the overperformance for the president's party, which was enough to get the president elected by definition, reverts to the mean in a midterm year. And so therefore, these voters who came out for Trump, the new voters who came out for Trump, and who are not particularly excited about voting for Rick gosh darn Saccone, right? That's where you could see a big drop-off, too. It's not necessarily in the areas where Democrats overperformed in 2016. I mean, they are going to, if you have a 16-point or whatever, even a 9-point edge, they're going to kind of have their cake and eat it, too. They'll both hold the gains they made in 2016 in the suburbs and rebound in the Trumpier areas, and they did kind of both of those things in this district, which is why it worked out so well for them. So it's not like you necessarily have to make a choice, but parties have big wave elections when they play broad maps. Democrats did that very smartly in 2006 under Howard Dean. Republicans under Karl Rove and American Crossroads, whatever, did that very smartly in 2010 where they played everywhere. Democrats are playing everywhere here. I think there are only 6 districts nationwide where you don't have a Democratic candidate. That's very good. That's hard to do. But anyway, Mike is...
No, I'm sorry. I was chomping at the bit.
Champing?
No, to champ.
Wow, that's a really dick move on my part. I'm sorry. I hate people like that. But I just became one.
Champing at the bit. So, to Nate's point, 538 contributor Nathaniel Rakich looked at state level special elections, of which we have way more than federal special elections, and he grouped those by state, right? And the states where Democrats are overperforming almost everywhere, but the states where they're overperforming most are red states. So Kentucky, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri. It does speak to the reversion to the mean point and the they need to play everywhere point.
So before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about what Republicans can do, should do. Is there anything that Republicans should be doing right now to defend themselves on the map?
Make sure all their candidates going 100 or 120 seats deep are prepared to run a competitive race. I mean, it's not easy to do. It's also not that complicated, right? But raise money, get a real campaign operation. Even if the Democrat seems like an also-ran, you never know, right? So be prepared to go 120 districts deep for both parties.
Also, cue up your Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer,
Seriously,
Hillary Clinton falling downstairs ads, or whatever it is that you want.
That Hillary Clinton video,
speech, that speech is going to get trotted out. I mean,
she was speaking in India, and she talked about half of the red middle of the country.
She basically said it was
deplorables part 2.
It was pretty tone deaf. She basically said that, well, I won the parts of the country that actually economically produce, which then a number of
the non-racist parts of the country,
right, and then a number of Democratic senators in states that are in very close Senate races, like Claire McCaskill and Sherrod Brown, were basically just like, Anyway, those things will get trotted out and be very, will be bread and butter for, I think, midterm Republican advertising campaigns.
I mean, what the GOP has to do. So the thing I think we can take for granted, dangerous to take things for granted, about 2018 is that you're going to have very high Democratic turnout. You're going to, with Trump up for his first kind of test on the ballot. You're just going to. Can Republicans also have their turnout be high by riling up the Republican base?
Champing up.
Champing up.
I think it'd be riling.
Can they do that?
Correct him.
I just did. I said riling.
Oh, good. Okay.
Without further catalyzing Democratic turnout or turning off swing voters. Maybe they can. That's probably how they would save the House, right? Is they say, we kind of have Trump get enough of our voters excited too. We're just a really high turnout midterm.
But how do you do that without turning off swing voters?
Well, I don't know. That's why I'm not a strategist. But if you look at the generic ballot, then it's like 8 or 9 points, right? But that assumes that there's not that much of it assumes registered voters, not much of an enthusiasm gap. I mean, I don't know.
Infrastructure weak.
Okay. So Republicans do have the advantage of Democrats rely heavily on black and Hispanic votes. Historically, black and Hispanic voters do not turn out that much at the midterms. A lot of the energy in the Democratic Party comes from younger voters.